Jorge Masvidal is about to shock everyone. With UFC 287 right around the corner, many have their eyes set on the co-main event between Gilbert Burns and Jorge Masvidal. And in my opinion, I think this is an extremely important fight for Masvidal specifically, because I think this is going to determine whether or not he's still on that elite level. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. Jorge Masvidal has been one of the biggest draws in the UFC ever since 2019, where he had very impressive victories over guys like Nate Diaz, Ben Askren, and Darren Till. And during that run, Masvidal was showing off his incredible striking ability, his great speed, and even his power against Ben Askren and Darren Till. But unfortunately for Masvidal, after that 2019 run, he hasn't had all that much success after that. He had a very competitive fight in 2020 against Kamaru Usman, and then in his second matchup against Usman, although he was actually looking pretty good in the first round, he ended up getting knocked out pretty badly. And at this point, his most recent fight was against Colby Covington, where he basically got dominated for the entire fight, besides that one stretch where he did knock Colby down. So at this point, many are wondering whether or not Jorge Masvidal is still elite, because obviously in 2019, he did have very impressive victories, and he just looked very impressive out there. And even though at this point he is on a 3-fight loss streak, he lost to the best of the best in Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman. So that's a huge reason for why I think this matchup against Gilbert Burns is going to be extremely important for Jorge Masvidal's career going forward. But before we can get into this specific matchup against Gilbert Burns, let's quickly take a look at Masvidal's game and see what he does well out there. So it's pretty clear that Masvidal is a stand-up fighter. He has a great ability to throw that jab, that left or right straight, uppercut, hook, cross. He has a great ability to switch stances whenever he wants, and he also has a good amount of power. Now besides his hands, Masvidal does a really nice job as well at utilizing those kicks. Whether you talk about those leg kicks, he has a great body kick, and even sometimes throws kicks to the head. And similar to his punching power, Masvidal has a lot of power with his kicks as well. Overall on the feet, I would say the best word that describes Jorge Masvidal is ferocious. But now moving on to his takedown defense, Masvidal actually has really good takedown defense. Now a lot of people see Masvidal as solely a striker, but he also has pretty good wrestling as well. Now we did see him get out-wrestled, as I mentioned before, by both Kamaru Usman, but more so Colby Covington, but you also have to consider these guys are literally the best wrestlers in the division. But once Masvidal is on the ground, he definitely has some nice abilities, but of course he wants to keep the fight on the feet. Now in terms of his chin, Masvidal has a great chin. Besides that one TKO loss to Kamaru Usman, he's never been knocked out. And in his most recent matchup against Colby Covington, we saw him get hurt maybe slightly, but overall his chin definitely did hold up. Even though Colby doesn't necessarily hit the hardest, it still was very important to see that his chin was able to hold up in that matchup. But now, let's move on to Gilbert Burns and see what he does well out there. So although Masvidal does have a lot of different abilities, he's more so of a striker out there. But the difference between Masvidal and Gilbert Burns is Gilbert is a lot more balanced. Now in terms of his stand-up ability, Gilbert is very capable. Gilbert throws a really nice jab out there, he has a nice overhand right, he has really nice hooks, and a really nice uppercut as well. And I think we actually saw a lot of his boxing ability against Khamzat Chimaev. Now in terms of his kicks, Gilbert also has a pretty nice ability to throw them as well, as he has a nice ability to throw kicks to the legs, kicks to the body, and even rarely kicks to the head. But although Gilbert does have a lot of abilities in terms of his striking, I wouldn't necessarily say he's the most technical guy out there, but with that being said, I would say he does a lot of different things well. But overall, the main ability that he does possess in terms of his stand-up is definitely that power. Gilbert has a really good amount of power and has knocked a ton of people out in the past, and also has hurt guys like Khamzat Chimaev, for example, who's known for his great chin. But moving on to his ground game, this is really where Gilbert excels. On the ground, Gilbert is extremely elite, as he does possess very good jiu-jitsu. Gilbert has a great ability not only to find the position, but eventually also find the submission. And although this isn't necessarily something that he utilizes all that much, especially in his most recent fights, it is certainly an ability that he does have, and we actually just saw him get a submission in his most recent matchup against Neil Magny. So obviously he still has that ability, even though he doesn't doesn't utilize it all that much. Now, in terms of his chin, this actually is something that a lot of people have been concerned about, but in my opinion, after that Khamzat fight, I think Gilbert's chin is a little bit better than people give him credit for. But overall, it is very clear that Gilbert Burns is one of the most elite fighters in the welterweight division, and he has been at that level for some time. But now, let's take a deeper dive into this matchup between these two men, and let me give my opinion on who I think is going to win and how. Now, although Gilbert Burns is actually a pretty heavy favorite in this matchup, I do think it's a lot closer than people give it credit for. Because although I do agree that Gilbert Burns is the better fighter out of these two guys, styles always do make fights, and I do think there are a couple flaws in Gilbert's game that Jorge can really look to expose. And that area that I think Jorge can look to expose certain things about Gilbert has to be in the stand-up. Now, although I mentioned before in the video, Gilbert does do a lot of things well in terms of his stand-up abilities, and overall he is very dangerous, but with that being said, defensively he is a little bit unresponsible at times, and we have seen Gilbert get dropped a bunch of times, particularly with that southpaw jab, while also getting hurt with other shots as well. And in my opinion, I do think there's a real opportunity for Masvidal to go out there and confuse Gilbert a little bit in terms of the stand-up and maybe look for a finish that way. Now, who knows whether or not Masvidal would be able to do this? Of course, it's going to be very difficult to do so, but I just do think there's a real flaw with Gilbert Burns' stand-up ability, and I think due to the fact that Masvidal is such a talented striker and such a diverse striker, has an ability to do a lot of things in different ways, it could really prove to bring a lot of problems for Gilbert in terms of the stand-up. Well, a lot of you may say if Gilbert isn't doing well on the feet, he can easily just take it to the ground, as he does have a big advantage in terms of that. And while that is true, it is also going to be very difficult to take Masvidal to the ground, as he does actually have really good takedown defense. So I actually do think there is a path to victory for Masvidal, but that path of victory would only be by TKO. I don't necessarily see him getting a decision victory over Burns, and I definitely don't see him submitting Burns. Now, in terms of Gilbert Burns' paths to victory, I do think he has some other paths, like maybe a TKO, although I don't necessarily think it's all that likely. He could also submit Masvidal, but Masvidal actually has really good submission defense, so I don't necessarily think this is all that likely either, but I do think it is decently likely that Gilbert wins by decision. Now, with that being said, I actually do see Gilbert Burns getting knocked down in this fight, but I don't necessarily think he's going to get knocked out. But my official prediction for this matchup is I think Gilbert Burns is going to win by decision. As I just mentioned, I do think he's actually going to get knocked down, but I think overall he's just going to be a little too much for Masvidal, although I do think it will be a very close fight. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening between these two men in this matchup. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Masvidal has a real chance to win this against Gilbert Burns, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.